Without further delays, I invite Professor Orly Manor, the chairperson of the board of the National Institute for Health Policy Research, the institute who is the sponsor, and much more than that, of the Israel Journal of Health Policy Research. Professor Manor, please.
Thank you, Avi. So, good evening, everybody, and good afternoon to our friends in the US. Making health policy is complex. It includes numerous stakeholders, and the health system is shaped by a variety of factors, including environment, and including values, and including culture, politics, and actually those who conduct health policy are coming from various fields and various disciplines. So when we try to learn from each other, sometimes the reaction is fine, but we are unique. Yes, we are all unique, and still we can learn from each other. Knowledge transfer between countries and systems is an important way for advancing and progressing our systems. And there are impressive examples of its benefit frequently for both sides. As is written in the Talmud, also experts can learn from others. הרבה למדתי מרבותיי, ומחבריי יותר מרבותיי, ומתלמידיי יותר מכולן. I learned much from my teachers, and learned more from my colleagues, and learned even more from my students. The area of measuring quality of care, which I am involved in, is a good example of the two-way benefits of knowledge transfer, but naturally there are many others. Now, the National Institute of Health Policy, in its activities, is aiming, among other things, at enhancing knowledge transfer between Israel and other countries, and we created a series of tools for that end, including the Jerusalem International Conference on Health Policy and our annual international workshop, and of course, the Israeli Journal. The Israeli Journal for Health Policy Research is also unique. It's unique in offering a suitable and a successful platform for both scholars and practitioners from us, one relatively small, we are not that small anymore, one small country, and share their knowledge with the world, and in turn, of course, learn from the experience of others. Now, COVID-19 created a huge need for knowledge transfer, and both the Israeli Journal of Health Policy Research and the Israeli research community play an important role. We will discuss today the characteristic of this transfer process, and hopefully we will get insights as to how we can build upon the lesson learned. I would like to thank all our Israeli speakers and our esteemed guests from abroad for participating in this event, and special thanks to Avi Israeli and Bruce Rosen for their outstanding job in leading the journal. Thank you.
Thank you, Orly. Thank you very much. And now we are moving to the first speaker, Professor Bruce Rosen from the Myers JDC Brookdale Institute and the Hebrew University. Bruce, please.
Thank you. Our article was published 2 months ago in the Israel Journal of Health Policy Research. The article had two main objectives. The first was to systematically assess the extent to which journal articles about COVID-19 vaccines have been authored by Israeli authors, with a special emphasis on the most prominent and most cited articles. The second objective was to identify factors that are likely to have contributed to the prominence of the Israeli authors in this literature. Our study was based primarily on analysis of publication and citation data from the Web of Science. We focused on articles about COVID-19 vaccines that had been published between January 2020 and June 2022. An article was identified as Israeli if at least one of its authors was affiliated with an Israeli institution. Special attention was given to those articles designated by the Web of Science as highly cited papers. A highly cited paper is a paper whose citation count is in the top 1% of all articles in that scientific field for the relevant publication year. We also considered which papers were designated by Web of Science as hot papers, papers published in the last 2 years whose citation counts ranked them in the top 1/10 of 1%. The bibliometric analysis was supplemented by interviews with scientific leaders who had been involved in the writing or the dissemination of the Israeli articles, including many of the people who will be speaking at today's webinar. Our first key finding was that Israel, with less than 1% of the OECD population, was associated with 3% of all the articles on COVID-19 vaccines, 9% of those which the Web of Science had designated as highly cited papers, and 15% of those that had been designated as hot papers. The absolute numbers are also impressive. Within 18 months of the FDA approval of the Pfizer vaccine, Israeli researchers had published approximately 80 highly cited papers about the real-world safety and effectiveness of this vaccine. The second key finding was that Israeli articles accounted for a substantial portion of the articles about COVID-19 vaccines that were published in leading journals. In particular, in both the New England Journal of Medicine and Nature Medicine, Israeli articles accounted for approximately 10% of the articles on COVID-19 vaccines. This was far more than Israel's share in all articles published in those two journals during the same period. Our third key finding was that a large number of Israeli researchers and research institutions played a part in Israel's prominence in the COVID-19 vaccine literature. Each of 15 different Israeli institutions were associated with at least 5 of the highly cited papers, and more than 25 different individual Israeli researchers were associated with at least 3 of the highly cited papers. Clearly, this was a research success that was very broadly based. Our fourth key finding was that while Israel had been a significant contributor to the literature on vaccines even before the COVID-19 pandemic, what happened during the pandemic was unprecedented. Israel's share in highly cited vaccine-related articles shot up from 2% in 2018 and 19 to 9% during the pandemic. In short, in the scientific literature on COVID-19 vaccines, many articles by Israeli researchers have been among the most cited and most prominent articles in the field. The extent of this is unprecedented, and a broad range of institutions and researchers contributed to this newfound prominence. Which brings us to the second part of our study. What accounts for this unprecedented Israeli prominence? Clearly, one major factor was Israel's early and steady access to the Pfizer vaccine, which enabled Israel to emerge in early 21 as a world leader in vaccination coverage. Other likely factors included the following: Israeli researchers' access to well-developed electronic health record systems linking vaccinations and outcomes, the analytic strengths of leading Israeli researchers and research institutions, and their capacity to quickly design, execute, and write up top-quality studies, the effective collaborations among Israeli healthcare and research institutions, and their collaborations with leading research centers from other countries, and the ability of Israeli researchers to quickly identify emerging research opportunities and mobilize accordingly. Overall, our study identified 12 factors that contributed to the prominence of Israeli researchers in the literature on COVID-19 vaccines. Many of those factors are COVID-specific, while others are based on features of Israeli healthcare and Israeli research institutions that were in place well before the COVID pandemic. Looking to the future and looking beyond COVID-19 vaccines, the article raises the question of the extent to which we can expect Israel to be more prominent than it has been in the past in other areas of medical research. The article concludes by suggesting that the answer to that question will depend, at least in part, on the extent to which Israel's government, healthcare providers, and research institutions take concrete steps to build upon their successes in research and publication related to the COVID-19 vaccines. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bruce. And now we have asked Professor Eric Rubin, the editor-in-chief of the New England Journal of Medicine and the Harvard University, to speak about the contribution of the Israeli studies to science. Eric, please.
Thanks, Avi, and thanks for asking me to join you. For those of you who are baking in the heat of the Israeli winter, I'll point out that there are 6 inches of snow on the ground, and snow just started falling again here in Boston. So if you'd like to cool down, you're welcome to stop by. I wanted to start with a short story. A reporter, health reporter who comes from the U.S. recently immigrated to Israel and told me that before they asked her about the information for an Israeli passport, they required that she choose an HMO to join. And I think that shows some of the distinctiveness of Israel that we just heard about from Bruce. The healthcare systems in Israel lend themselves not only to providing great care, but as many of the people who are here on the panel who have published with us recently have shown, it produces this incredible resource of data that during COVID has really proved so incredibly valuable and so unique. Bruce just stole most of my thunder. He made a list of the many advantages that Israel has used. He got different numbers than I did. I counted up publications in the New England Journal, which is a relatively prominent place, I think. If you look at simply research publications on COVID from Israel, and by that I mean really almost exclusively Israeli authors, I counted 23 over the 2021 to 2022 period. And many of these had a profound impact on policy worldwide, certainly here in the U.S. And as Arnold Monto can tell, who's here today, can tell you, those data became an important part of the considerations throughout the world in implementing the vaccine. And Arnold, we get to spend the day together tomorrow talking about more vaccine policy and using presumably more Israeli data. So we heard a lot about the advantages. I want to repeat a couple of them, but also point out a couple of more. Of course, Israel had the advantage of recognizing the value of the vaccine early on and deciding as a matter of national policy to roll it out widely. And that meant that there were a large number of vaccinated individuals. It also maintained a national database, as well as the electronic health records of individual HMOs, which allowed the Ministry of Health to do its own research apart from those of individual HMOs. But the EHRs, the electronic health records, have been a very important part. And then, of course, the great research infrastructure available in Israel. So I do want to address the questions that Bruce raised. Going forward, what will enable healthcare policy research and healthcare research in general in Israel to maintain the position it's taken during COVID? I think there are some both opportunities and challenges. One opportunity is that Israel has, from an age standpoint, has the demographics that are very similar to many other developed world countries. The age distribution is relatively representative, and that's really good. I will say that having seen a lot of articles, the way that demographics are represented in Israel, which is largely by religious affiliation, makes a lot of sense in Israel because the ethnic groups make sense, but doesn't make any sense anywhere else. So it's harder to apply lessons learned from those demographic analyses to any other country. And I think Israeli researchers might want to think about how better to define those groups in a way that can be generalized. The other opportunity, the other two opportunities I wanted to mention are that we had a lot of fantastic data built on studies built on observational data. But observational data has its limits. And I work for a journal which primarily publishes gold standard prospective trials. I think that Israel is in an excellent position to be doing a lot of these prospective trials. They're often done in single healthcare systems elsewhere, and all of the advantages that help an observational study help a prospective study too. So I'd love to see these gold standard kinds of studies coming out of Israel as well. And the third opportunity, which I think Israel is uniquely qualified to take advantage, is the idea of big data analysis. The days of the large randomized controlled trial as the single piece of evidence, I think, have to come to an end. RCTs are incredibly expensive. They take an incredibly long time, and they generally are designed to answer a single question. Can we do better than that? And I think it's going to take a lot of innovation to figure out what is a better way to get at information of very high quality standards. And I think that Israeli researchers are in an almost unique position to do that. So I look forward to seeing what comes in the future. And I just want to end by expressing my gratitude to the many Israeli contributors, as I said, many of whom are represented here today, who've contributed to COVID research and the articles, particularly in our journal. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eric. And I just want to tell the audience that you might leave earlier before we finish the webinar. And thank you for your contribution and participation. We have asked Professor Arnold Monto, who is the chair of the US FDA Committee on Vaccine and the Related Biological Product Advisory Committee, to speak about the contribution of the Israeli study to the US policy development. Arnold, please.
Thank you very much. And first, let me correct something which is a small point, but which is, as everything that happens in this in the regulatory world is of some importance. I'm actually not the chair of the advisory committee. I am the acting chair. And the reason I'm the acting chair is that the chair was heading or is heading one of the clinical trials of a COVID vaccine, and therefore is in conflict of interest, which shows how rigorous the FDA is in trying to be fair and to be even-handed in terms of all of the issues and the vaccines and the intellectual property that is represented in the world of vaccine development. It's hard to come third after two talks which really cover a lot of what I really had planned to talk about. So I'm going to try to bring up a couple of elements. First of all, the importance of the studies in Israel and how they have worked in the regulatory environment or the decision-making environment that FDA has taken. And first of all, I just want to remind people that the VRPAC, the advisory committee that reviews vaccines, is only advisory. And FDA can accept or not accept what we recommend. We really do not have a role in even setting our own agenda. The agenda of our meetings is set by FDA, and then we're thrown in, and especially the chair is thrown in to the situation of trying to make, for example, tomorrow, and Eric talked about the meeting we're having tomorrow. In 2 hours, we are supposed to have 2 discussion topics and a vote. Now, that's going to be quite interesting to carry out, given the fact that the topics that we are to discuss, which mainly are questions of going forward with vaccines into the future. That's going to be a little bit complicated, but that's the way things work with the FDA. Now, the FDA also makes the decisions about who is to present at the meetings. And it was FDA in consultation with some of the members of the committee and with others that really recognized the importance of Israel science in bringing forward conclusions based on large data, as Eric said, and observational data that were done in a rigorous fashion. I think as an epidemiologist, and I have to put in a word for large, carefully done observational studies, bringing up real-world data that apply and are not quite the same as doing clinical trials, but give you an answer as a intervention is rolled out. And that's really what the Israeli data did. And the data came, as we know, from various components in Israel, from the government, from the Kupot, and from major hospitals such as Sheba Medical Center. And all of these contributed in different ways to the conclusions that were met. And the first real contribution from Israel came in two areas. When we were talking about booster vaccines and the issue of myocarditis and the frequency of myocarditis in the population. In terms of the booster rollout, Israel was ahead of the United States and could draw conclusions about the necessity for boosters, not only to prevent mild infections, but to prevent severe infections. And the issue we had to deal with was the unexpectedly quick waning of immunity in the population, and Israeli data convinced everybody that boosters were necessary, first in the high-risk population, but then in a general population, because the waning was not only limited to the high-risk population, older individuals especially, but the general population. And as Eric has pointed out, the demographics in Israel help with this. And the data collected in Israel also help with this, because then we can divide things up in terms of the various population groups and those who are in risk categories. Very difficult to do in other situations. The data for myocarditis also came ahead of the rest of the world, and in fact became even more useful because of the situation in Israel, where you could drill down using the electronic medical records and also in a mobilized healthcare system. And Israel really mobilized the healthcare system to deal with COVID, which overcame a lot of the bureaucratic walls that divide some of the entities in Israeli healthcare. And I think going forward, it is going to be very important to look at how the barriers that have slowed the development of a lot of the observational data which Israel can develop, how those were overcome in the COVID emergency. And we heard during some of our discussions in the advisory committee, oh, this is not US data. But I think we gradually realized that the similarities of the Israeli demographics and also the development of healthcare in Israel gave us a window to the future of what we were going to be seeing in the US as the data developed much more slowly, and with our very hybrid healthcare system, as some of the data emerged from different elements, from some of our HMOs, and also from the CDC database. And CDC has got large numbers for a big country, but also has to deal with state health departments and things like that, which slow the development of data comparable to what came out from Israel. I think looking forward, I hope that healthcare non-emergencies will have the same kind of attention and priorities established, so the unique characteristics of Israel and Israeli healthcare can have a continuing effect on health policy, because the elements are there. And the COVID emergency showed what can be done when everybody is mobilized to provide the kind of information that has come out of out of Israel and from skilled Israeli scientists. It's all there. And what we have to do is try to keep it going so that we can continue to have Israeli scientists so heavily represented, overrepresented as in the healthcare journals and in terms of development of policy. I am going to stick around, so I'll be able to answer some of your questions as we go forward. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much, Arnold. And now we will hear some lessons for the future from some authors and researchers that contributed to this science. And the first one is Professor Nachman Ash, the former Director General of the Ministry of Health and the former coronavirus commissioner. Nachman, please.
Hi, everybody. Good evening and good afternoon. First, I would like to thank to the authors of the excellent paper that we speak about. Even though I took part in the research and policy making during the pandemic, and I'm well familiar with most of the facts and conclusions written in the paper, the analysis of the impact of the Israeli research and publications regarding the COVID-19 vaccine is well written, and the discussion is comprehensive. I would like to bring here the point of view of a decision maker in the Ministry of Health. As the one who had to decide on the booster doses at the beginning of the Delta wave, I knew that my decision must be evidence-based. We had to prove that the vaccine efficacy is waning several months after the second dose, and thus convince both health professionals and the public that the booster dose should be the main strategy to deal with the Delta wave. I remind you that the government was reluctant to issue any restrictions such as closing schools or limiting work. It was not that obvious at the beginning of the wave that the problem is vaccine efficacy waning, and the other option that the then new Delta variant is vaccine resistant was possible. And believe me, it was a tougher decision to decide on the fourth dose, even when it was limited to population at risk in order to prevent severe disease and death during the huge Omicron wave. In both cases, we were lucky to have a great collaboration with a group of researchers from the Weizmann Institute, the Technion, the Gertner Institute, and the Ministry of Health. Researchers from various domains who used several methods to analyze the data, come to conclusions, and give us recommendations. To be the first in the world to give the booster dose without FDA approval or before FDA approval was not an easy decision to take, but as you support it with good data and great minds that analyze it carefully, it becomes much easier. As for the future, we need to take this experience to support our decisions in the national level for many other challenges that we face every day. But in order to be able to do that, we need to improve availability of data and cooperation between all stakeholders in Israel. I would like to emphasize 3 points. First, we need to establish access to data at the national level that include all relevant data items like medical history, current disease and medication, and even recent lab results. This was missing from the national database in the COVID-19 pandemic, and thus, for example, we in the Ministry of Health were not able to analyze vaccine efficacy in view of background diseases. Such analysis was done in the HMOs. Access to the data mentioned above should be given to decision makers and researchers from the Ministry of Health, from other health organizations like the HMOs and hospitals, and from academic institutions. Needless to say that privacy issues should be taken into account and resolved. Second point, cooperation with researchers from different domains like mathematicians should be encouraged in everyday life. I'm sure it will open the door to new thoughts, methods, and findings. And third, I would like to emphasize the importance of data transparency to the public as a means of recruitment of public opinion and increasing adherence. Transparency means to share not only the bottom lines, results, and conclusions, but also share the data and let the public evaluate and analyze it. There are risks in such a strategy because the data is available to manipulation, but I think that the benefits are greater. To conclude my point, during the COVID-19 pandemic, the Ministry of Health collected data mainly because of practical operative reasons. But along the way, we understood that it is crucial for evidence-based decisions. Now we need to learn the lesson and expand data collection and analysis in our routine work and in more domains. We have to use the momentum and use our advantages as a centralized healthcare system and keep Israeli research at front. Thank you.
Thank you, Nachman. Thank you very much. And now we are moving to Professor Gili Regev from Sheba Medical Center and Tel Aviv University. Gili, please.
Yes, thank you. So I was asked to point to two major aspects which made it possible for a single tertiary hospital to report so many significant and impactful publications. So first, I would think probably is the important role of the Sheba CEO support. And when I go back to the end of December 2020, as vaccinations became available, and I understood that then that real world data on vaccine effectiveness and on immunogenicity, understanding the immune response is really crucial, I proposed to Professor Kreis to initiate the Sheba healthcare worker cohort study. I fearfully came up to him and requested a budget to recruit, and I said, 1,000 healthcare workers? And his response was, why 1,000? Recruit everyone, anyone who agrees. We have the responsibility to report to the world. And I think that his full support was essentially what made these studies feasible. The second point is the design that we could implement, and that is the importance of the longitudinal follow-up with comprehensive and detailed data collection. This is typically not available, as Professor Ash just mentioned, in big data collected by HMOs or governments. So we requested healthcare workers to give blood on a monthly basis, to report symptoms and test frequently by nasal and nasopharyngeal swabs. At times during surges, we even asked them to come on a weekly basis, even when they're asymptomatic, and they were requested, and actually are still, to fulfill electronic questionnaires again and again on comorbidities, on symptoms. Currently, we're serving them for long COVID symptoms. And I think that this amazing collaboration was achieved through trust relationship built between researchers and employees and the transparency of the results. And I think also their motivation to advance science. And I'll just end by saying that I feel very privileged to be the one to lead these studies, and I'm very grateful to the healthcare workers for this collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you, Gili, and thank you for saving some time, which is also appreciated. And now we'll move to Professor Ran Balicer from Clalit Health Services and Ben-Gurion University. Ran, please.
Thank you, Avi, and thank you, Bruce and team, for the wonderful paper that you put forward that really helped to emphasize the work that has been done here by so many talented groups. I will touch upon, as I was asked, on two main aspects. And I think the first one I'd like to actually touch upon is that the ability to create and sustain sustainable international and interinstitutional ongoing collaborations between leading scientists in multiple complementary domains is a key factor that allowed I think the unique capacity to produce what was then methodologically robust yet groundbreaking research in near real time. Otherwise, it just couldn't have been done. Just this week, we celebrated in the presence of the President of Israel and the Harvard Vice Provost and medical school deans, the inauguration of the joint living laboratory, the Berkowitz Living Laboratory that we have with Harvard Medical School. And it is this ongoing collaboration with our amazing team, but also with Miguel Hernan and Mark Lipschitz and Zach Kohani and Ben Rice. And I think that the availability of these excellent minds that worked in collaboration with us before the pandemic and then during the pandemic that really allowed us to design and execute the level of certainty that we needed in order to publish so quickly on such a contested topic at the time. So this is also true by interinstitutional, because even within Israel, we've collaborated with many different academic centers in order to make that happen. So in this event, we actually benefited from a decade of efforts to build the Clalit Research Institute, which was the first research institute started within healthcare HMOs. And at that time, it was considered unheard of. And why should an HMO deal with research? That's not part of what you're supposed to do. So the ability to create a very lively research community within the organization that is now dramatically expanding to all of our institutes, all of our hospitals, all of our community settings, and they're all gaining the capacity, the access to the data and the availability of good methodology is, I think, something that would allow us to move to the next level. The second point that I'd like to mention is actually and it goes back to something that some of my something that both Eric and Arnold have mentioned, is the fact that we had a single ground truth in Israel about what is COVID admission, what is COVID-related ICU visit, what is COVID-related death. I think it was key in order for us to have the reliability and ability to compare notes between different parts of the healthcare system doing studies, and to be able to have this single ground truth. I think was really important. And as a lesson learned for the next event of importance, I think it's as important not only to set clear rules at the beginning of how do you count and what do you count as an event that associated with in that case, in that disaster, but also I think that next time we should make more efforts to validate in real time, to sample those admissions and to see which one is related and unrelated to the event in question, so we can both improve our outcomes, but also we can answer some of the doubts that were casted at different times, whether or not we're counting what counts. And so I think this is a lesson learned that we could, on how we can even further improve. And I'd like to end by after thanking all of the people outside of Israel, to really thank the amazing team of Clalit Innovation, Clalit Research Institute, for their amazing work in leading. And I'm in the point in which the interns at Clalit Research Institute were first authors of a New England Journal publication. And I think that's kind of where we would like to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Ran. And now we move on to Sharon Alroy-Preis from the Ministry of Health, the head of the Public Health Services. Sharon, please.
Good evening, and thank you for the invite, and thank you for this excellent article. The speakers before me were so excellent that I don't have much to add, but I would like to point out that when we started, our main business, at least in my opinion, in the Ministry of Health, was not publication. In a time when we have such an unknown situation, to me as an epidemiologist and one of the team that needs to decide on policy, what we needed were facts. We needed data. We needed to make sure that we're making sound decisions based on data. And this is what led to everything, making sure that we have data from early on, connecting all the labs, something that was unusual. We got all the information to the Ministry of Health, getting positive and negative test results. Usually for reportable diseases, we're getting only positive results, right? For the people who are confirmed for that communicable disease. Here we got all the information, and that was done very early on by the people in the Ministry of Health in the first wave, and it was crucial to get that data. Then when we had the vaccination campaign or antigen testing or serology, everything got into the same place from all the locations where vaccines were administered, and having that database in one place was crucial. And I think this is something that we've learned from this pandemic, that we need data that is online, that is reliable. It wasn't perfect. We still had things, as Nachman said, still have things that we didn't have. We didn't have chronic diseases. We didn't have reason for admission. We knew it was COVID admission. We knew severity, but we didn't know reason for admission. And so in the Omicron wave, when people started asking, well, are people admitted for COVID or with COVID? We really didn't know. We didn't really have the ability to say that, to differentiate, except for people with severe disease. So we trusted the severe disease, but getting the information about ventilated patients, getting the information about mortality that was accurate. So that data was crucial. So I think that's one thing. Looking forward or looking to the future, what we need to make sure that we have the ability to get data on communicable diseases on as reliable and online as possible all the time. So after COVID, or not after, alongside COVID, we had monkeypox. And it was so frustrating that after having all that data, to making sure that we lead and we make decisions based on data, we got to monkeypox. And we kind of fell back to the 17th century of sending, pieces of information in WhatsApp and emails and faxes. So that cannot happen. We need to make sure that all the data is getting reliably to one place, and we can actually manage communicable diseases and outbreaks, us and partners that we have in the system. So that's one thing. I think the other thing that we need to say is about the vaccination. We mentioned here that Israel vaccinated early on. We mentioned that we have a very strong public health system that can vaccinate quickly, and the public that came to be vaccinated. And I think the campaign early on was very, very good, with a lot of role models going forward and saying, here, we're vaccinated. So that contributed. But I have to say that part of it was the data agreement with Pfizer. And to me, that data agreement that had a lot of people can criticize it and for this and other reasons. But I think the bravery of, at that point in time, Chezi Levi, who was the Director General, of saying, we're going forward to this thing because otherwise we won't have enough vaccinations to vaccinate even our elderly population. So to me, that is a note to say, sometimes you need to jump ahead and be brave and take brave decisions when you are in a pandemic and your purpose is to save lives. The other part was really what you do with the data. So you vaccinated people and you have all the data in one place. And I think Nachman mentioned this, and I have to say that this is a crucial part in at least our ability to analyze the data correctly. And it's the partnership with partners from academic institutions. Weizmann Institute, I saw Ron Milo here in the public. I have to say this is the best partner to work with. Amit Hooper from the Grantner Institute, I saw him here as well, and the Hebrew University and the Technion. And the ability to work with such a smart, humble, dedicated people doing this on their own time, working with us, thinking with us. We're showing data to one another and thinking together, what does this mean? Knowing that this is the first data in the world and we need to be very cautious about the analysis and the conclusions, I think was crucial. And again, looking forward or taking this to the future, I think, as Nachman said, that we need to find a way in the Ministry of Health of opening data with privacy assurance, with anonymized data, with all the restrictions that needed, but making sure that we're bringing partners in because smart minds are not just in the Ministry of Health, they're in other places as well, and we need to work together. And I think another thing that was crucial to get decisions done quickly and then see the result was the advisory committee. We had a very helpful advisory committee. Part of the advisory committee is here, Gili and Ron and others, led by Boaz Lev and Tal Brosh. That was crucial because we needed to think with a group of people that was multidisciplinary, getting to the decision of, for example, we're doing a third booster, even though it's not FDA approved. Why are we doing this? Looking at the data together and then deciding and doing this in short circles. So that group could meet 3 times a week at night, 4 hours, debating on what to do. And that was crucial to get the right decisions. So I think I have to mention that group as well. And looking again forward is connecting the public. And I think this is a challenge that we need to figure out how to do, because we in the Ministry of Health, in the academic community, in the professional community, can do a lot of things and write papers and do analysis. If the public is not with us, understanding what we're doing and why we're doing this, next time is not going to be that successful. And I think now we have to bring back the public trust, and that will be part of our ability to actually continue doing what we're doing.
Thank you very much, Sharon. And now we move to Professor Gabriel Chodick from Maccabi Health Services and Tel Aviv University. Gabi, please.
Thank you so much. I'll try to be very short. I think there are my two lessons are a bit more general. I think that the first one is that the COVID-19 provided an excellent example of how the public sector can collaborate with the industry, with the pharma industry, for the benefits of both parties, despite the negative sentiment that some of the public has about collaborating with the industry. Of course, we have to make sure that the public interest is kept, but there is a very wide range of win-win gain for both parties in assessing the safety and effectiveness of new technologies, new medications, new vaccines using real-world data. Of course, we should not jeopardize the commercial interests of our organizations, and we have to make sure that data on market shares, actual costs, et cetera, should be kept. But that can be easily arranged in the right contracting, as was done by the Ministry of Health. Also, we have to keep the data privacy, and make sure that no individual level data will leave the organizational premise. But yet, there is still a huge room for collaboration, and the industry may provide not only resources and access to new medications and new technologies, but also expertise, bring the best experts from anywhere in the world, and also international contacts, which sometimes are very important for a small country like Israel. So I see that as a very important lesson. The second lesson is from the academia. Often when we recruit new faculties to our departments, we tend to prefer those who have published in hot topics and interests of areas of a great interest, those who have published in high visibility journals, et cetera, and sometimes we tend to give up on scientists that work in the modeling and theoretical modeling of epidemics and outbreaks, because typically they use all data, pre-vaccination era data, and they seem a bit less relevant for our real world everyday lives. But in this case, I really think that it shows that something that might be considered as irrelevant in 2018 becomes extremely important in 2020. So we have to make sure that we secure the resources to have faculties that work in areas that we have a national security interest. This includes not only theoretical modeling of epidemics, but also areas of disaster management, radiation epidemiology, those areas that get less focus in every day, but may be extremely important tomorrow. So that's to conclude. These are my lessons from the COVID, and thank you everyone and the organizers for this very interesting event. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabi. And now we move to Professor Nadav Davidovitch from Taub Center and Ben-Gurion University. Nadav, please.
Thanks so much for the organizers, and thank you for the co-authors, especially Bruce, Gabi, and Avi. I think that we missed a point. Sorry?
And yourself.
Thank you. Yes, it was a great pleasure. I think in retrospect, maybe we missed a point that I want to raise that is very crucial, and this is the historical aspect of public health, even before the state was established, with Hadassah and COPC, and the tradition that continued later with the community-based research that I think it's embedded in Israeli research. This is something that should not be taken for granted. We are facing a grave crisis in public health. I know that Sharon is now doing a major process for rethinking and doing lots of things. And what was done here was amazing, but that's something that shouldn't be taken for granted. I think it's also based on solidarity. Sharon, you mentioned trust, I think is crucial. And I think we need to promote public health ethics. There were many ethical issues that were raised. Gabi, you raised some about collaborating with the industry. Clinical trials has the basis in IRBs and the Helsinki committees in Israel, but we need to establish a public health ethical committee that will deal with the specific aspects that were also present during COVID. Another aspect I want to mention that I think is a lesson is thinking about normal times, or as we call them now, the new normal times. Just to give you an example, Professor Arnold Monto, as he said, is visiting Israel quite a lot. At BGU, we have an exchange program with Michigan. We had a major study with Clalit that Ran was leading and Professor Monto, and also with us at BGU and Soroka and Berenson. And what was unique in the study, and I think they should be replicated and maybe was missing a bit during COVID, is having mixed methodologies, including qualitative methodologies. So in the study I just mentioned related to influenza vaccines, including among healthcare workers, we used also qualitative research, and I think this was crucial in order to understand the question of vaccine hesitancy. I think that having on normal times collaboration, I myself now chairing the COVID-19 task force of the Association of Schools of Public Health European region, we had in real time people presenting to us, exchanging ideas with European and American colleagues. Sharon just mentioned that she's now with the WHO. I think the WHO is here not just to see what we're doing, but I think also to learn from us in a global question about NOPV and circulating vaccine-derived polio. So this kind of exchange must be nourished during normal times. It was mentioned about the knowledge transfer. This is crucial. At Ben-Gurion University, we have a knowledge transfer and exchange research. We have ISPEC, a center, implementation science policy engagement center led by Professor Maria Ellen. I think she's here with us. And finally, we need to speak also about public health leadership. This is also crucial because moving fast in real time kind of research needs also leadership. This is something we are promoting with the Association of Schools of Public Health in European region. And my last point is about training. I really suggest you to read a wonderful paper by Nature. The title is PhD Training is no longer fit for purpose. And the need for reform. I see, Avi, that you're smiling. And I think that maybe PhD research in public health, because it's public health is an interdisciplinary in all schools of public health in Israel. We have from basic science to clinical research, molecular to health policy and cost effectiveness. And we need to break the walls between the disciplines. And I think this was done here in COVID. I think it can be improved. And of course, used in more challenging aspects like in climate change, that just an example of something that is going to affect our life. The Institute for Health Policy Research did last week a meeting. I said there that the fact that the Institute is doing such a meeting is giving like a kosher stamp on the topic. And I think it's another opportunity to do similar things also in this kind of challenging things for human beings. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadav. Thank you very much. And now we are moving to the audience, and the first one who wanted to share with us some of his lessons is Chagai Levin from the Hebrew University and from the Public Health Association. Chagai, please.
First, I really want to say that this is wonderful to see the great contribution of the Israeli researchers to the field, which definitely helped to save many lives. I truly wonder if one of the differences between Israel and other countries is the relatively liberal regulation on assessment of COVID vaccine in real life, and should other countries learn from our experience and change their ethical policy regarding the need for IRB, regarding agreement with commercial companies, or should we have done better job in better protection of ethical aspects during the pandemic? And I'm just asking this question all the speakers about that.
Okay, anyone volunteer to answer? Not that there is a difference, really, Chagai, but Nadav, please.
I think this is actually referring to what I said about public health ethics. I think that current IRBs or Helsinki committees, as are called in Israel, are mainly focusing on clinical trials. I think that public health research is different on several levels. In general, these kind of questions are also very important in terms of the question of trust. So Sharon, again, I think we discussed it already several times. It's very important that you will establish a public health ethics committee of the public health directorate, not services. That's the way we should call it. We call it the Israeli Public Health Physician Association. Presented it, I think, when Milka Donkin was still the chair like 15 years ago. And I really think it's the time so we can discuss. I don't think there are clear-cut answers, but we need to discuss it.
Okay, please, Sharon.
So I think I'll maybe split my answer to several things. First of all, I think what we did in the Ministry of Health was not a clinical research. We were not giving vaccines to the population and seeing if it's working or not. We were using an FDA-approved vaccine that was started given in the third wave, as you all remember, during a lockdown because there was a surge in infection rate, and that was the only tool to get out of this circles of infections and to save lives. And in one of the publications, by the way, that we're talking here was a publication where we analyzed the first 3 months of the vaccination campaign and saw how many cases of death, of hospitalization were averted in those 3 months. And in those 3 months, there were over 5,500 people whose lives were saved and over 70,000 cases that was averted of critical hospitalization. So I think the reason to give the vaccines were to save lives, not to get publications and saying, I totally agree with Nadav, and we were actually trying with the IRB committee in the Ministry of Health to get a special route for public health in order to look at this differently. And I remember talking to the IRB committee and one of the members trying to explain to me that it's like putting electrodes, doing research on putting electrodes in people's brains, and you need to compare. And I'm saying, no, this is public health surveillance. It's completely different. It's data type of analysis. It's not, we're not doing anything like this, and we need to look at it differently. And there are actually guidelines of what to do by the WHO, published in 2017, what is considered public health surveillance. So it's not, shouldn't be at the same point. And I think now, hopefully with Avi, we will be able to really come up with this special IRB for public health, making sure that we have the right tools, ethical tools to look at the things that we're doing. But I want to emphasize that what was done here was saving lives.
Arnold, please.
I just wanted to echo what Sharon is saying, and I'm sure she knows about Public Health Authority to collect and disseminate data in the United States. We are doing that right now, for example, with the Ivy study, which is looking at prevention of hospitalizations by COVID and influenza and maybe RSV vaccine. That is being collected under Public Health Authority. What we do is go to the IRBs to make sure that they are comfortable with collecting the data that is being collected, not for research, but for public health. That doesn't mean it is not used for research, but the main purpose of the data collection is for saving lives using approved indications. So that is something that is going on in the United States right now, and we have not really had any complications about this. As long as you know in advance that you have to, how to do it, you can do it.
Thank you, Arnold. Gili?
Yeah, just to add, I totally agree with what Sharon has said, and just to add on what has been done at Sheba, we had an IRB committee nearly on a daily basis, and whether it was observational studies initially when we didn't recruit people, just looking at data, we had an IRB for every study that we had. Once we started collecting blood, of course, we had informed consent of the people. And I think that, you know, the fact that these data are out is very important. And I think it was all done very ethically. It's difficult for me even to hear that question in that way. It's obviously very important to have ethical committees and discuss all this, but some of the way that it's questioned is, I think, not really in place regarding the studies that came out of here.
Okay, thank you. And let's move now to Arona Friedman from the Ministry of Health, from the ICDC.
Good evening, everybody, and thanks for the opportunity. And congratulations, obviously, to all the people, all the researchers who publish in high-impact papers, which is extremely important. But I want to mention that there are multiple other researchers in Israel who were engaged in vaccine effectiveness research, looking at aspects that perhaps could not be addressed when publishing extremely fast. And I think those are not less important than articles that are published really fast. And I think this research should be ongoing. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for your contribution. And now I'll ask Gabriel Israel from Kopat Cholim Leumit, Leumit Medical Services, to share his thought.
Hi. I would like also to thank the authors of the paper for this important study and for organizing this webinar. Much has been said about the reasons why Israel was at the forefront of research during the COVID-19 pandemic, and how the fact that the 4 state-mandated HMOs hold a centralized database of patient information allowed to quickly connect and analyze health data to guide clinical decision. How the fact that Israeli authorities rolled out a vaccination campaign in record time allowed Israeli researchers to report about the effectiveness of the vaccine in the real world early on. So Leumit is the smallest of the 4 Israeli HMOs and has a young research institute which was created about 3 years ago and which I have the honor to lead. At Leumit Research Institute, we followed the effects of the vaccine in the population. I think it is worth mentioning that around August 2021, we published a large-scale study of antibody titers in the population following both vaccination and infection, and quantified the decay of antibodies in the 2 groups. And based on the decay rate we observed in the vaccinated, we anticipated that the ability of the vaccine to prevent infection would wane after about 6 months post-vaccination. And surely enough, we were soon faced with waves in the numbers of infection. In our highly vaccinated population at that time, as Nachman said, the widely accepted explanation was that the Pfizer vaccine was less potent for the Delta strain, which had become the most prevalent. But we observed that the vaccine was still potent in individuals who were recently vaccinated, and published as a preprint a test negative control study that showed that the time that has elapsed since last vaccine injection was
can you share with us what you have learned for the future?
Yes,
for
so
success,
I think it is a
what will
good
you
example.
do in routine days, regular times?
Yeah, so I think it is a good example of how research from Israel helps to solve worldwide problems, the responsiveness and the willingness of Israeli researchers to collaborate and improve healthcare allowed us to identify problems and find pragmatic solutions in record time. And I really hope that we will continue to develop collaboration with partners worldwide so that quality research from Israel would continue in the future to find its way to the most prominent medical literature for the benefit of everybody.
Thank you very much, Ariel. So now it's time to say thank you to everybody. First of all, to our speakers, especially the speakers from the United States. Thank you very much, Eric and Arnold. And thank you all the speakers from Israel, and of course to you, the audience. Without you, there is no webinar. So thank you very much, good night, and we'll see you, most of you, in the coming days. Thank you and good night.